1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready to go.
Could I begin by having the right side of the room stand up, please? Thank you, everyone. If our class was a random sample of an average university, those of you standing would represent the people attending counseling for mental health diseases. The back row would take a seat now while the rest of you remain standing. You represent the students who have taken a medication for mental health concern. This is also the number of people who have seriously considered attempting suicide. If this front row would remain standing and everyone else take a seat. 2 people out of our sample have been hospitalized for a mental health concern. Andrew, if you take a seat. 1 person has committed suicide. Thank you, Eli, and thank you everybody for cooperating. These statistics were taken from the Center of the Collegiate Mental Health 2013 annual report. As you can see, mental illness is a very serious crisis, a quiet crisis is affecting nearly half of our population here on campus. I'm sure that all of us speaking today have experienced mental disease in some way or another, whether it be through a friend or personally. This should be no surprise because college students are the main victims of mental diseases, and unfortunately, they're also the victims of the stigmas attached to them. Because of its prevalence, we are here today to convince you that it falls to us to remove the stigma that surrounds mental disease. That will allow the victims and the sufferers and our friends and even ourselves to be able to comfortably seek help. We hope to accomplish this today by bringing to light the widespread presence of mental disease on campus, by discussing the stigmas attached to them, by explaining what benefits will really come about if we remove these stigmas, and by presenting the steps that you can take to help. So I'm going to start today, and what I'm going to do is explain a little bit of mental health on universities. I want to discuss the types of diseases we see, the reasons that mental diseases occur so much in our population, and the stresses that they can create on daily life. The National Alliance on Mental Illness put out a survey entitled College Students Speak, which recorded the most common diseases. The survey was conducted on students who were in college and who had already diagnosed with a mental disease. So this is what we had. 27% reported depression, 24% identified with bipolar disorder, 12% put themselves in an other category, which included things like eating disorders, personality disorders, and obsessive compulsive disorder. The same organization that had all these stats for our main diseases also did a little bit of study on student dropouts that related to mental disease. An anonymous student respondent in the survey was quoted saying, "A depressive episode made it impossible for me to go back to class, and I did not get help until it was too late and I was withdrawn. I could never afford the cost to go back because I lost my scholarship for being withdrawn." Now, unfortunately, students are constantly finding themselves in similar situations. In fact, the same organization, NAMI, this question was posted to college students who left college. They asked, "Are you no longer attending college because of a mental health disease?" And 64 of the student dropouts said yes. Dropping out is just a way to deal with the pressure from a mental illness, but sadly, it is not the drastic way, and it's not the most drastic measure that students will take. But why is mental health issues really so prevalent among our population? To answer that, we can examine the reasons from Michael Kerr's article, Depression in College Students. These were the reasons that he found. So poor eating habits, lack of sleep, lack of exercise. This is one I think is a big one, because just imagine all of your high school students coming from team sports and structured exercise, going to very individual exercise regimes. Also academics challenges, that comes and kind of ties into stress, financial worries about tuition, roommate conflicts, or really conflicts with anyone you have to interact with, or failed relationships. As you can see, the first 4 of these were actually topics that some of you spoke about, and some of the other ones I'm sure that you can relate to. But I would like to look at stress in a little bit more depth. 2 years ago, in 2014, Greg and Recraze argued that stress levels have increased throughout the decades. He supported a study that found that the average high school student in 2000 had the same level of anxiety as a psychiatric patient in the 1950s. Now, this really came as a shock to me, because just imagine how much more stress we have on ourselves as college students today compared to that high school student 15 years ago. Another article that interested me was Salier's comparative study of campus experience of college students who have a mental disease versus just a general college sample. To summarize his point, peer pressure, work overloads, deadlines, tuition factors, and low self-confidence, all of these little problems are intensified in the presence of a mental health disease. So problems that face every single student, such as just stress and any problems that come up, they are much higher. The stress is experienced on a much higher level for those struggling with a mental health condition. Troy Adams, in his journal entitled American College Health, found a correlation between mental illness and the probability of contracting an infectious disease. So this is kind of some of the physical consequences. He linked depression, anxiety, and exhaustion to a higher chance of catching bronchitis, ear infections, sinus infections, or even strep throat. So take a step back. Not only must this person dealing with a mental health condition face their own condition and everything that comes with it, they must endure all these physical factors that comes around. So I've touched on some of the reasons, the types, and consequences of mental illnesses, and here is Sam to discuss their stigma.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about what stigma is, the stigma against mental illnesses, and how the stigma affects people's willingness to seek treatment. After doing extensive research on this topic and having experienced these stigmas in my own life and witnessing them in my own life, I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable on the topic. So first, I want to tell you what stigma is. And NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Health, defines stigma as something that labels a group of people as less respectable than others. It is a mark of shame, a mark of disapproval, and it results in discrimination towards this group of people. It also leads to prejudice and discrimination, and it turns family and friends against the people that they really care about. An article published by BMC Psychiatry defines stigma as a mark or attribute that makes the person from a whole unusual person to a tainted and discounted one. A study published in 2009 by Medical Care Research and Review defines 4 main types of stigma against mental illnesses, these being, first off, public stigma, which is basically negative stereotypes and prejudice that we have towards people with mental illnesses. The second one is personal stigma, which is basically an individual's own belief in the stereotypes of mental illness. The third one is perceived public stigma, which is how someone views the public's stereotypes on stigma. And lastly, and probably most importantly, is self-stigma, which is how the individual identifies with the stigmatized group and then applies these stereotypes to themselves. And so this stigma specifically kind of touches on how defeating it is to feel stigma and how this self-stigma from the outside society and community can kind of make their mental health worse. So next, I want to talk about how stigma affects people's willingness to seek treatment. So generally, or ultimately, stigma against mental illness prevents people from seeking treatment for a variety of reasons. In a national survey of college students that suffered from various mental illnesses conducted by NAMI in 2012, it shows that the number one reason preventing people from reaching out for help with mental illnesses was stigma, even in front of a busy schedule and hours of service or lack of info, long wait, and other. So that's pretty prevalent. It also, the same study, highlighted the fact that stigma, again, was the number one reason why they didn't disclose, and this is specifically talking about public stigma or public perceived stigma and how they thought the outside world would perceive them as less lesser of a human in a way. And then the same study again highlights the fear of stigma and why these people didn't reach out for help even when they knew they were able to. They still didn't just because of stigma. And another study published by Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology in 2014 states that stigma also affects internal cognitive and emotional processes and stress coping reactions and self-concept, which basically means that it deters their self-value, and so it makes them feel lesser of a person, and it makes them feel like it makes them feel like they don't deserve to be healthy again. It also stated that anticipated discrimination led most to the reduced chance in disclosing their illness with friends and family members. Another study on college students, published by Issues in Mental Health and Nursing, states that those with mental health issues are more likely to blame themselves and less likely to disclose their problems than with those with physical illnesses, such as diabetes or basically any kind of physical illness. Also stated that it leads to increased mental health issues and reduced chance of receiving treatment. Another study published by the Psychiatric Rehabilitation Journal in 2015 states that among college students especially, stigma against mental illness makes them feel as though they should be self-reliant. So basically, college students are educated and smart, and they feel as though their problems aren't real because of the stigma, and so they feel like they shouldn't have to rely on other people to get help, and that they should be able to fix them themselves, which makes their mental health worse. In another article published by the Huffington Post, this compares how we treat physical illnesses to how we treat mental illnesses in the public eye, and it pokes fun at a serious topic. And as you can see, it says, like, have you tried, not having the flu? And you just need to change your frame of mind when someone's hand is cut off. Like, these are ridiculous things, and we'd never actually say these things to people. So it just kind of highlights how bad the stigma is and how just unrealistic the way we view mental illnesses as a whole. So after learning about these different stigmas, I hope that you take the time to think about them and think about people you know who are affected by mental health. And now Carly is going to talk about the ways in which we would benefit as a student body by eliminating the stigma against mental illness.